Hey guys, welcome back to We Met at Acme. I'm so excited to be here with Dr. Darcy Sterling. Hey Darcy,
Hey, Lindsey, thanks for having me.
thanks for being on. So before we get started, tell us what's your favorite romantic gesture?
Well, I love touch. So
Mm,
any physical, like if my hair's in my face, if somebody were to like push my hair out of my face, I love that. I love when people are talking to me and or like in particular when my wife is talking to me and it's like really important and she puts her hand on me. It just like really lets me know that she's attuned to me.
right.
I think that as human beings, particularly in this moment in time, attention is such a small commodity. It's such a scarce commodity that we want so badly to feel heard and like we're being really connecting with our partner, that anything like that really just signals to me that somebody is listening, that the person I'm talking to is listening. It
Yeah.
should just be my wife touching me though, FYI.
No, I totally agree. I was in bed. I've been in bed with my husband all week because he had surgery on Monday. And
Oh
so he
no.
like cannot move around. And like for the most part, we're watching TV or we're on our phones. But last night I was like, you know what? I'm gonna put away my phone and I'm going to lay on him. And it was like this very tiny gesture, but like he was so happy. He was like, oh my God, like you're coming to lay on me. I'm like, yeah, but we don't even realize that we're just like on our devices all the time and we're together as couples.
And we are touch deprived. We are totally
Mhm.
touch deprived. So letting someone know that you're there with them, I mean, putting down the devices is everything. It's everything. It's so noticeable when people do it because we've become blind to it when they don't do it. Like we've become immune to it. We don't even notice it because
Right.
everybody does it. We're constantly connected. So even when somebody just puts, that's kind of sad. That's a very low bar.
I
It's a
know.
very low bar.
It's sad. It's really sad. I know. I think I'm going to do it more. Before we get into some of these questions, give us a little bit of background about Darcy. Um, you said your relationship status. How did you and your partner meet?
So Steph, my wife and I met at NYU. I was getting my PhD. She was getting her master's degree. And when you're getting your PhD, it's so uncertain, like when you're actually going to graduate or if you're ever going to graduate. They give you like 10 years to finish your dissertation and do all your research and stuff. Um, so I knew she was I wasn't trying to keep pace with her, but I was definitely trying to graduate. And I didn't have a whole lot of faith in myself that I was like, if you take the foot off the gas, you're never graduating. So it was really cool because we met in graduate school and we wound up having the exact same graduation date, got to sit next to each other in Washington Square during the big graduation that NYU holds every year. And yeah, so we met at NYU. We're best friends or friends that turned into best friends for a while and then started dating. Being friends is like it's foreplay for lesbians, so
I
it can be. It definitely
I
can
love
be.
it. Well, I feel like, it should be for all kinds of couples because it's like you establish that trust and
All
that
right, let me just say, can I just tell you,
tell me.
this should be like this should be an experiment right here. So you think that when you know the person as your best friend, you know everything about them.
Right.
Like you know what you're getting. Let me tell you, things change when you start hooking up.
Right.
Things change because the minute you start hooking up with somebody, particularly if you have a friendship as a foundation underneath it, you fall in love real fast. Like you are like propelled into this obsessive phase. Like the first phase of the relationship hit us real fast and real hard. And your brain is soaked and secreting all these neural chemicals that will basically, and this is not just me and Steph, this is everybody who starts dating and becomes like infatuated with their partner. You are basically dating high, just so you know. That is literally what your brain is functioning like. You're not seeing each other's flaws. You're feeling so good that you're showing up as your very best self. And when you show up as your best self, everybody likes you. Everybody likes you, and everybody would fall in love with you. And that lasts a good amount of time. That lasts throughout the whole period of time that you're like falling in love. And then everything that goes up must come down, and those chemicals start dissipating over time, as it should. You start coming out of the honeymoon phase, going into the second stage of relationship, which is I call it organic love, because you're in love and it's organic and it's kind of raw. You don't necessarily have relationship skills. That second stage of 3 is going to be the litmus test to determine whether or not you have them. And if you don't have relationship skills, can you develop them? Because that's the only way you're getting out of that second stage. The first and the last stages are the best. That second stage, that is the one that most people think about when they think about being in relationships. And that stage is not one that anybody wants to stay in. It's basically, it's known as, that's where the bickering starts. That's where the tug of war begins.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to say, coming back to the point of all this, didn't mean to dive into a dissertation about the stages of relationships. But what I wanted to say is, you think that when you're dating your best friend that you totally know who you've got, but then they start looking even better. They look and are even better. And like any of the weird idiosyncrasies or character traits that weren't so great early on, those start to go away, because when we feel great, we don't look cranky, moody, I don't know, hard to get along with, overly opinionated, too passive, whatever the traits in your partner are. And there always are traits that we dislike, that you don't really love about the partner, or you wish could be dialed down. Those go away on their best days. Everybody has great days where they don't look like their worst selves. That's the whole honeymoon stage.
Right.
So you think you know everything about the person, and you really don't until that second stage. You got to get out of the honeymoon to know who you're dating. You got to get out of it.
And I want to talk about that stage. I'm so glad you brought it up, because it's been coming up a lot on the podcast and just like in conversations that I'm having. I call it the 1 year itch. I don't know if this is a real thing, but I do think that in a good relationship, like one that could be forever, you're in a honeymoon stage for at least a year, I think. And so after that year is when things like start to come up, and when you do that bickering, right? I mean, tell me if you agree.
I do agree. I think the honeymoon stage depends on, it depends on how intense and how paced the relationship is early on. That will determine how quickly you burn through the honeymoon. Folks, take it slow. Don't burn through the honeymoon. Those are the best months, and if you're lucky, a couple years that you will ever have. That is as good as your partner is ever going to look. Those are going to hold the memories that are going to keep you fighting for the relationship for years and decades to come.
Mm-hmm.
For most people, it lasts 9 months to 2 years. So 1 year, I'm not mad at that. I think that that's pretty accurate. 1 year is about right. What happens then is we do start becoming individuals in the relationship. If you think about it, it makes perfect sense. It's kind of like the adolescent stage of development that we went through as teenagers, where we want to be individuals within the family, but we want to know that the family loves us enough for us to have our own opinions and look our own way and differentiate ourselves from the family unit a little bit, but still have the unconditional love that we grew up with. That's kind of like the second stage of relationship. You have the basis of trust created. You've fallen in love with each other. There's security and safety enough so that the two partners then try to become individuals. As those chemicals dissipate, their pre-honeymoon selves emerge, and we want to be able to be an individual within the relationship. The mistake that we make is thinking that the bickering, the disagreements, the sometimes the tension that builds or the changes that happen in that second stage, the mistake we make is thinking that that's a red flag. It's not a red flag. That's a flag that you're in the second stage of relationship and your partner and you are both not consciously outside of your awareness trying to be individuals, because nothing is sustainable if we're putting on a show. Not that we're really putting on a show in the honeymoon stage, but we don't even, many of our own needs are being fulfilled through those neural chemicals, which once dissipate, we now have the need to fulfill them. Suddenly people are like, I kind of miss hanging out with the girls. I think I'm going to go back to having a girls' night out. Or like, maybe I want to start, I don't know, engaging in whatever hobby it was I was doing. Or like, I suddenly have a whole lot of homework to do. I have to like really study tonight. And that's brand new information for our partners. They are like, wait, is something wrong? There's nothing wrong. Your partner's trying to become an individual within this relationship. And the tension that ensues and the bickering that also stems from that is your opportunity to develop the relationship skills that are necessary to get the hell out of that second stage. That second stage is most relationships live and die. They do not, because people see the bickering, the fighting, the arguing, and they're like, oh, this must be the wrong relationship. If you're waiting for someone you don't disagree with to be your long-term partner, you're going to have a rinse and repeat of, and that's fine. Not everybody needs a long-term relationship. The honeymoons are a lot more fun than the long-term relationship stuff.
Right.
If you can get out of that second stage to the promised land of mindful love, that is everything. That is everything.
Yeah. And I want to hear your definition of mindful love and also kind of go back and say, okay, the first stage is honeymoon. The second stage is
organic love.
And then it's mindful love. I want to talk about mindful love, but before we get into it, I want to back up to kind of like, you know, what you said about if you can't handle, you know, the bickering, if you can't handle this, like no relationship is going to work for you. What about the people who end the honeymoon stage? Like I've had relationships in the past where the honeymoon stage has ended early. Like I'm talking after 4 months, sometimes after 6 months. And I didn't know that was a red flag. Now I do, but I didn't know back then. And I do think that that's a red flag if the honeymoon stage ends too quickly. But what do you think?
You know, I've not heard too many people report that to me, to be honest. Can you tell me more? Like, what was your experience like?
Like we're fighting before we have problems. And problems don't arise. Problems shouldn't arise, I don't think. But again, like, you know, you're the expert in the first 3 months of dating, like 100% problems. There are going to be so many worse problems. If you want to have kids, those problems are going to be crazy. If you don't have that foundation of like, we just really like each other, you know, if you're already fighting in like the first, I don't know, some people are even fighting in the first few weeks. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I think that's weird. I think that's really weird. I don't often say that there's such a thing as a mismatch, because I think when you have well-developed relationship skills, you can make any relationship work. But there is such a thing as like having a basis of like similar values and interests. And like, if somebody is like fighting with you or picking fights with you so early on, I'm wondering, is that person expecting you to pay the debt from their last relationship that they got burnt from? You know what I mean? It seems to me like maybe there needed to be a pause between getting back on the dating apps and the time that they met you. You know what I mean? And ending their last relationship. Like maybe there should have been some like self-exploration, some self-reflection, and trying to discern why the last relationship ended before you jump into the next one. Yeah, that's weird. 3 months, 4 months in, there shouldn't. What are you fighting over? Like which restaurant to go to?
Right. Like, like you don't have real problems yet. And also like if you can't tackle those fights, which are over nothing, you're not tackling the real fights. So going back to mindful love, what is your definition of that?
So in mindful love, the way you get out of organic love is you learn the relationship skills you learn how to recreate a lot of the great stuff from the honeymoon phase. And it's kind of blended in like a perfect smoothie to the security and trust and all the miles you guys now have under your belt as a couple. So you feel very similar to the ways you felt in the honeymoon, but it's not because it's all happening naturally and organically and without effort. You're doing it mindfully. You have determined that the reason you fell in love in the first place is because early on, you guys were doing things with each other, for each other, to each other that caused you to fall in love.
Mm-hmm.
You've learned that love is not just an emotion, it's about replicating those behaviors again now, even though you don't necessarily feel the motivation that you felt in the beginning, but you felt that motivation because of those neurochemicals. And those aren't going to go away. And if you don't learn how to do the shit that you did early on, even though you don't want to, or you don't feel particularly motivated to do it, like I don't ask myself every day, do I feel like going to work? I just do it. I show up and I do my thing, and my clients are happy, and that's how life goes on. We don't use our emotions as a compass for how to behave in almost any area of our life, except in our intimate relationships. And I honestly think that that's a big mistake. We have to understand that the reason we fell in love in the very beginning is because there were certain things that we were doing that caused our partner to fall in love with us. And we have to replicate that, because when you stop doing those behaviors, the emotion of love dries up. So in mindful love, you have the foundation of trust and security that you built up getting into that second stage of relationship. And you've learned to behave in many of the ways that you did early on. And you begin to see the rewards of that, because when you do those things, it makes you feel more in love. It makes your partner feel loved by you. They start behaving differently towards you. And then you get a lot of that great stuff that happened early on, but it's done mindfully. It's done consciously, at least in the beginning, and then just intermittently. Like what we all want is kind of like what we call unconscious competence, which is where our relationships work and we're not having to white knuckle our way through thinking through. The sense that we're walking on eggshells is gone. We've like built up the relationship skills. We have it in our muscle memory enough that we can literally just move forward. And basically, we've practiced the relationship skills long enough and deeply enough that it just happens. We have good technique. That's what we all want. But periodically, you do have to use your brain, no matter how long you've been in mindful love. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it sounds like a great place to be when you're in a long-term relationship. I guess my question is like, how do you know if you're in mindful love versus like if you're kind of stuck in this organic love and you don't even know, and you've been together for 5 years?
How do you know? That's like asking an Olympic trainer, how do you know you're training for the Olympics? Because the drills that you do every day, because it's not something unconscious. You have made a decision to try and work through the problems in the relationship.
No matter what.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nothing is no matter what, is it? I mean, I don't think anything's no matter what.
No, I mean, unless like, no matter, unless they cheat on you with like your sister, then it's like, okay, goodbye. But
right. So you've made a decision that barring outrageous, inappropriate behaviors, you're going to try and make it work. You're going to stop trying to bitch about who let the dog out or who didn't bring out the garbage. You're going to try and stop complaining about that. You have figured out your side of the street. Change is really hard. Okay. It's really hard when you're motivated, when you're invested in it, and when you have a big reason, which is the partner, to try and change. Getting out of that second stage is a mindful act, and you have sweat and you have bled to get out of that. Very few people get out of that easily and without effort. Most people get out of that. And that is why the divorce rate is what it is and has been for ages. Because if you're just relying on getting along, to be happy with each other, I don't even know what that means. What does that even mean? You're going to agree to everything. One person's going to be passive. The other one's going to have an opinion, or you're going to like switch it up.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. It does. That's not how human behavior works. When I meet people who tell me I've never had a fight with my partner, and I only work with individuals, I don't do couples.
I can't with those people. Something's
Oh,
wrong.
my mother. Oh my God, how Freudian. My wife.
It's amazing.
God forgive me. I called her my mother, and anyone who knows me knows that's not a compliment. My wife is a couples counselor, and I have no idea how she does that. I have no idea how she does that. So when people come to me and they say, I've never had a fight with my partner, I'm a little taken aback. I'm like, really? Because to me, that tells me that you don't feel secure enough to disagree with your partner.
Either that or both of you are just like, sweeping things under the rug and holding on to resentments, whether you're aware of it or not.
Exactly. Thanks. That's exactly right.
Yeah. That scares me. Another thing that you definitely know a lot about, because you work with, your clients on this often, I'm sure, is the work that you need to do on yourself alone before entering a relationship and like bringing the best of you into that relationship. I was in therapy for 6 or 7 years before I met my significant other, and had gone through more than one therapist, which I feel like is necessary sometimes.
100%.
Yeah.
Right. It's like marrying your first boyfriend or girlfriend.
Right.
Who hits it right the first time? It is a numbers game.
No one.
I'm still looking for my right therapist. If anyone has one, 100%.
I have the best one ever. I'll tell you after this. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll tell you after this. She's phenomenal. But like I look back and I'm like, what work did I do on myself? I started to accept things that I couldn't change, which I feel like was a big part of therapy for me. I started to realize like what my red flags were and things like that, right? But what else is work that you can do on yourself?
We have to know ourselves in order to guide a partner on who the fuck we are and what makes us tick. If you don't know yourself, then you're two people who have no idea. You owe it to your partner, folks, PSA. You owe it to anyone you date to know yourself a little bit. And we don't live in a world where self-reflection, where we create the space for that, really. Everyone is busy from the minute they're born. Parents are like putting them in their extracurricular activities and over scheduling them. And then we become young adults and we overschedule ourselves and we have to hustle to make a living. And like, God forbid you live in a big city with, the big zip code that requires the big salary attached to it. You're like juggling a few jobs oftentimes really early on in your career. And then you blink and you're in a long-term relationship. And your partner doesn't understand why you're getting upset over things, and neither do you. You need to figure that out. You need to be able to know the things you like in relationships, the things you don't like in relationships. You need to know like what your communication style is. I'm someone who likes to talk. I'm someone who likes to address things. I don't like to sweep things under the rug. There's a tipping point to that. Until I learned how to determine what is worthy of discussing, I'm sorry to all my exes. I'm sure that it was like exhausting. I'm sure it was exhausting because every thought that came top of mind, I wanted to discuss. And that's not necessary. That's a burden that you put on a therapist, not on a partner. But the therapist needs to help you figure out what your communication style is. Are you somebody that avoids discussing serious topics? And if so, you got to work through that because life has serious topics involved in it. There's no decade in life. There's no there's no year in your life where you're not going to have a serious conversation. And if you're somebody who avoids it and puts their tail between their legs and does whatever you do to exit, it's going to be a real problem. And chances are you're going to meet someone like me, who's a big talker and wants to talk things out, because opposites attract. And that is very comfortable for partners unconsciously. This is how we help each other grow. We also need to know, like, what is your disagreement and fighting style? Do you know how to have a fight appropriately? Do you know how to disagree appropriately? Do you know how quickly you get activated, you get lit up, you get jacked up? Trying to like whittle it down to like normal terms that normal people understand. Like, how quickly do you get pissed off? And how quickly do you return to your emotional equilibrium? You need to know this stuff about yourself. And what do you need to do in between to self-soothe? Do you have any self-soothing techniques? Or is the way you self-soothe to avoid, or to just blurt it all out and projectile vomit onto your partner and expect them to know what to do with it all? You know, you need to know what your fighting style is. You need to know, do you know how to have a fight? Do you know what constitutes kicking below the belt? Do you know all these things? These are real important. You're not going to have a partner you don't fight with. You're not going to have a partner you don't fight with. If you're with somebody who is an avoider, do you know how to create safety so that they're willing to lean into a scary conversation? Do you know how to create the evidence that their brain and nervous system needs to begin to trust, oh, serious conversations, they're just conversations. They don't result in conflict.
Right.
People who are conflict avoidant tend to create the very thing they're trying to avoid because they avoid having real conversations.
Yeah.
Life is all about real conversations. We have to learn how to have them. So you need to know a little bit about your own relationship patterns also. Like, how do you deal with distress when you're upset with your partner? Do you have a functional coping mechanism, or do you dysfunctionally? Do you cheat? Do you exit the relationship by like overworking or over drinking or hanging out with your friends? Or do you have like this amazing set of tools in this toolbox called your relationship skills toolbox, where you actually know how to calm yourself down within a reasonable amount of time, which I would say is an hour or two. I mean, unless you're talking about like, I don't know, an Armageddon situation, most things we should be able to calm ourselves down, regulate ourselves inside of an hour or two.
Right. I know. I hate when people are like, I need 2 days. It's like, why?
I really think that most people could probably solve world hunger inside of 2 days. I think that's bullshit. 2 days,
Total
you
bullshit.
need a day and a half to avoid.
Right.
And then you need the pressure of knowing that you committed to me to come back to me at 48 hours. In those 4 hours, you're going to figure it all out. You could have done that sooner.
Agreed.
You could have done that sooner.
Agreed.
There are some people who, I mean, if it's a terrible thing, like if a partner inadvertently like hurls a character assassination on their partner, like if you're cruel and you're like, by the way, every time you get pissed off at me and you like go online, I know you're watching porn. Like if something like that erupts in an argument, maybe it takes a day for the person to regulate themselves. But most disagreements aren't that deep, and they're not that height. They're not that intense. People don't know themselves. And most of what we learn is through media, social media, regular media, movies, television, podcasts. And we see these archetypes, scripted archetypes, because whether it's reality television or not, please believe me, that stuff is edited to create a storyline. And it's not based in reality. Right. That's not reality. The problem is that none of us talk about this stuff. And none of us are open about our own struggles in relationships, in our own relationships. And we're so used to trying to put this front on and present as like the happy, perfect couple that each of us feels isolated in our own distress. And and because nobody talks about it, we tend to think there must be something wrong with my relationship that I feel this way. When in reality, if you'd ever just talked to your girlfriends about it, you'd probably hear we're all struggling with the same stuff.
Right. That's so true. I also feel like in terms of like therapy, it can be really hard to accurately portray to a therapist like how you act in a fight with your partner.
Which
Like,
is why you need a good therapist who can ask you the same questions 500 different ways,
mhm,
frontwards, backwards, inside out, to determine that they're getting a consistent answer. Right. Clients don't know what to present to their therapists. Therapists are entirely too passive, by and large, in the process of therapy. And that's historically how we were trained. We were trained to be
right.
passive.
Mhm,
Clients don't know what to present. And yes, of course, like in a traditional therapeutic setting, if the therapist is not in, I don't want to say interrogating, but asking clarifying questions and helping the client to question their account,
right.
then the client is just going to get validation for what it is they've been doing, and they're going to continue doing it again and again and again, because most of us don't walk into therapy saying, well, I really fucked up yesterday, and here's what
Right.
I did.
Right. Right. I know. That's so true. And like, some people will reach out to me and they'll be like, I went to therapy yesterday and I left like feeling worse and like more stressed out about my situation. Like, how do I know if A, like I'm seeing the right therapist, like
Boom, you're
B,
not. Boom,
yeah.
you're not. You're not.
Hmm.
If you leave therapy consistently as activated or more activated than you felt walking in the door, this is not the right person. You could accidentally be dealing with some trauma, and talking about trauma just reactivates it. It does not dissolve it or dissipate it whatsoever. We know this. We've researched this. Talk therapy is by and large ineffective for traumatic memories.
Right.
So, and generally speaking, if we leave as activated or more activated than we were coming in the door, it's because the therapist is very passive,
Hmm.
or we don't feel heard by the therapist, or we needed a tool and there was no suggestion on what to do next. So, of course, you're going to leave more activated, because now you have to wait a whole other week to come back to the person. And what are you going to do? You're going to walk in the door and you're actually going to say to your therapist, so the thing I talked about last week, I want a tool for that. I only wish clients didn't have to say that, because therapists should be offering up evidence-based tools in every session. In every session,
How do
they
you
exist.
make sure that you have a therapist who's not passive, if that's how most people are trained?
Well, historically, that's how most people are trained. I see the younger generation of therapists and it gives me hope. I would say, look, let me back up and say, how do you know that it's even the right therapist to start with? You should want to have coffee with your therapist. If you were alone in a coffee shop and she was the only one in there, there should be she should be emanating something that makes you
Mm,
feel warm and welcome, and like she is, like there's a basis of understanding between the two of you. The days of like this sanitized therapist where like you come in, it's a blank slate, I almost look like a nurse. Those days are gone. I don't think they ever existed. I
right.
don't think they ever served clients. That people don't have decades to be in therapy anymore. We need solutions fast. We need solutions fast, and we need, and the good news is that every therapist doesn't have to come up. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are evidence-based solutions out there. You just have to use them. You have
Right.
to be trained in them and be curious enough to look for them and solve your client's problems. I would feel like such a failure if my client was in a rinse and repeat cycle. I mean, forget years on end, months on end would make me really uncomfortable.
Right.
Weeks on end makes me uncomfortable, but I have to sit with it because I can be too neurotic and I can jump right to a solve. And people need to be heard first. People
Mm,
want to express their feelings first. And also, ideally, the client says, yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to change this up. I don't want to do this anymore. So that's how you know if you're with and it should take like 3 or 4 sessions to know whether or not you're with the right therapist. I do a 30-day trial with my clients, which I know is weird, but I do it because I only want to work with clients who are really ready for change.
Right.
And my type of therapy, like I give my clients homework every day of their life so that they're working on therapy 7 days a week, not 1 day a week. When they come back into therapy, we review the homework to see how to scale it up. It's
Mm-hmm.
really it's not about them coming in trying to learn a foreign language 1 hour a week. They'll never learn it that way. And so that's not a traditional therapy style that fits every single person. So I do a 30-day trial. Inside of 30 days, you should know whether or not you've got a vibe going on with your therapist,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that if you're still feeling like you're like it's a monumental effort to talk about things and that the therapist is not like, it should be a bit of a dialogue. It
Right.
shouldn't be a monologue. So, and then once you've decided, yeah, I think this is a pretty good fit. I think this is okay. I feel pretty comfortable talking to her. She doesn't feel like this cold, withdrawn, you know, boundaried up weirdo who doesn't want to admit to being a
Right.
human being in front of me. I
Right.
always find it easier when I'm struggling with an issue to know that the person in front of me might have gone through something
Oh,
similar.
same, same. I
You
need
know,
that.
the
Yeah.
days of non-disclosure, I'm just like, I can't. If you can't admit to being a human being in front of me, I don't even want to consider you as a therapist.
Totally, totally. And
Because
also
it,
like because you also want like someone who has what you want in a way too. And if you know nothing about them, for all you know, they live at home with 4 cats, which is fine if that's what you want. But if you are going to a therapist because you want a relationship model that you can look up to, that's not your person.
so do you think 3 cats is like the tipping point, Lindsay?
I
I'm just wondering. I have 2. I'm just wondering at what point I become that little. I'm
think after 3, you become a cat lady for sure.
okay. Got it. So 3 is a tipping point. I
Hmm.
appreciate that. But then going back to the question of like you've heard so many of your friends say that they've gone into therapy and they've left feeling worse. You got to tell the therapist that.
Yeah.
Also, the therapist just should know. I'm sorry. The
Yeah, but
therapist
like
be a little
but
attuned.
I think the only thing scarier than not liking your therapist is telling your therapist that you don't like them. Like that's not a thing. I remember my first therapist, I never broke up with her. I just said to her, I'll let you know when I'm going to come in again. And that was
Yeah,
it. Like that was it.
I
There was
I
no
get it.
official breakup.
I get it. Listen, I counted 5 recently. I've had 5 therapists in my life. Each one was a long-term relationship. Um, and I think I only terminated, you're supposed to go through this process we call termination. What
Hmm.
terrible, I call it completion.
Yeah.
Um, I've only gone through that process with one of them. Every other one of them I ghosted. And I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud of it. One of them I hurt by ghosting.
Yeah.
I heard from somebody else I referred to her. I'm sorry for if you're listening. I'm sorry. I should have grabbed my ovaries and been the professional that I would want, that I try to be every day. But
Yeah.
I was pussy and I didn't do it. And I have an exit strategy. I have an exit plan built into every part of my treatment with clients so that they don't have to figure out for themselves when it's time to break up. I
Yeah.
work in
Good.
6-month increments for that reason. It keeps me motivated. It keeps them motivated. And every 6 months, we have a conversation about should we move forward or have we completed the work we need to complete? All of which is to say, what you did was, yes, breaking up with your therapist is horrifying. And I've tried to set up my practice so that people don't have to break up with me. We mutually break up.
Uh-huh.
I initiate that conversation. Too much on one person. If 2 people get to vote on whether or not to be in a relationship, then 2 people should vote to end it, I think,
Mm.
professionally, not
Right, right,
always
right, right,
personally.
right, right.
But so, oh, and I just lost the thread. Wait, what were we talking about, Liz?
You were saying the one that you ghosted, but you have the setup to end it
No, but before
mutually.
that, it was a question. I was trying to harken
It
back to the
was,
question.
oh, the question was, you feel bad
Oh, you
leaving
said
together.
it's actually harder to, the only thing
Yeah, it's
harder
yeah.
than,
Then
yeah, yeah,
leaving
yeah.
feeling shitty is then having to break up.
So you don't have to walk in and be like, you suck.
Mm,
You can make it an I statement. You can come in and say, after your normal warm up, because we all do our warm up at the top of therapy. You can come in and say, so I left feeling really uncomfortable last week. I felt jacked up. I didn't feel better. Do you know why? Do you have any thoughts on why? Like, I thought
yeah.
that talking about things makes you feel better. And maybe, look, and if you want to make it about you,
I'm
you'd be
like,
like,
I'm cringing. Like, I can't.
maybe it's me. Maybe there's something wrong with me.
Right,
Like, did
right.
I do something wrong? Dude, if the therapist is not cued in at that moment to be like, no, 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 what that was a beginning. And what should happen now is let's synthesize what we talked about in the last session
Right.
so that we can figure out together what tools we want to give you. I just can't, again, I am so disappointed by my profession that is such a common
Yeah.
experience. I just
Yeah,
find
it's
it,
so scary. And then also when people say that to me, when people are like, I think I want to break up with my therapist, like, what should I do? Should I go in for the next session? I'm part of me is like, no, why should you pay $300 to break up with them? That's
okay, and I
why
hear
the
you on that.
text is better.
I feel that. I feel that.
If you're like, if your mind is made up, then don't go in and
Can
pay
I just
300.
also ask, like, as a public service, can you guys please tell your therapists why you're stopping and don't make it about, don't be like it's me, not you. Like, you gotta tell the therapist if they didn't
Yeah.
have the needs. Even
Yeah.
if you send an email after the breakup session or after the breakup text, you gotta let them know. That is so important because think about it.
Right.
They're not gonna learn.
I
They need
know. You're
the
right.
takeaway. And
I'm
again, I know
guilty.
it's
Like,
not each of me too.
yeah.
I'm guilty also.
And
I've
now I wish I
literally had
had.
future therapists say to me, why didn't you tell the therapist? Like,
Right.
maybe you want to write a letter. I'm like, I'm not writing a fucking letter.
Right. It's
I
too
know I
late.
should. I'm not a big enough person. It's not happening. Not writing.
Totally. It's too much. It's too late. But if my first therapist is listening, what I would say is you are a wonderful person, but you gave me nothing about you. And I truly towards the end felt like you didn't care about me. And that's the truth.
Yes. And that is how it lands. That is the most important thing. So when we give nothing of ourselves, there's, first of all, in therapy, there's such an inherent power imbalance. Like, we have all the powers, the therapist, the client walks in, we expect them to unzip emotionally from neck to groin. We got to throw some skin in the game
Yeah,
and
you have
neutralize
to.
that a little bit. I just think that's basic human empathy, is to
Hmm.
try and minimize the power imbalance a little bit, and to when we throw a little skin in the game by self-disclosing appropriately, we are saying to the client, I actually trust you enough with this story.
Right. And also, like, you care more because, like, therapists are humans too. And, like, I'm sorry, I don't care if someone's telling me a story and all I do is listen to their story and I've never said anything from my end. So it's like, it can be a conversation too, I imagine. Like, I want this person who's sharing their life story for 30 minutes to know that I understand because I've been there. But that's it, but just now that I understand because I've been there. And now I'm more invested because I gave you a little bit too, you know?
100%. It totally bonds us. If you think about, go back to middle school, or even a little bit younger than that, preteen, where most of us bonded with our besties so quickly. How did we do it? We had these sleepovers where we shared everything, and it was mutual. When it's a one-way share, the bonding happens much slower,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't feel as safe. It doesn't feel as safe.
Right.
So when I sense that my client is struggling with embarrassment or shame, and I can cobble up, and I always can because I've made every mistake there is, sadly.
Right. Right.
I can cobble up a personal experience that I can throw out on the table. that might neutralize how they feel a little bit, because the shame gets in the way of the work. I can't have you feeling shame to work with you. I have to neutralize the shame, because if you're judging yourself, how can we look at your behaviors objectively and dissect them and decide which we want to change and which we want to stick and keep the same? You know, that's a really hard process for somebody to go through. And when they're judging themselves in anticipation of me judging them, then it makes it so much more difficult. The work we do doesn't involve a lab test. I have no objective data except your words.
Right.
So I have to help you not feel ashamed as you're sharing your words with me. But yeah, I totally hear you. I understand not wanting to be the messenger.
Yeah. Well, we'll end with this, and then I'm going to ask you for a quote or piece of advice. But I had a friend once who was seeing a therapist, and this is so bad. And the therapist had glasses, and one of her sessions, in the reflection of the therapist's glasses, she saw that the therapist was playing a computer game. I know. If you can see
Okay, so this is a podcast and I'm mute. I sound like I was muted because I was fucking speechless.
Crazy, right?
No, it's so not crazy. I'm gonna up it. It's not a pissing match, but I am gonna try and normalize it, which really just is so embarrassing to my field. I have done a type of therapy called EMDR, where the client is meant to close their eyes during parts of it. And when I've opened my eyes, a therapist was texting and said to me, sorry, just a second, I'm handling my daughter. Like, no remorse, no apology. Just, at least she acknowledged it and didn't try to gaslight me. But even worse than that, 2 different therapists dozed off on me. 2 different therapists dozed off on me. First of all, I find that offensive from like an entertainment perspective, because I do think that I did a good job of putting on the Darcy hour. Like, some of them I saw 3 times a week. I think I did a pretty good, but my stories were off the charts crazy because I come from a nutty family.
Right.
And like the stories alone, and historically trained, like traditionally trained therapists will say, well, let's talk about why you put me to sleep. Can you imagine? It was my fault. It was my fault.
Ego
it was my fault for bullshitting in the sessions.
Oh God.
Not their fault for not being participating in the sessions or asking or calling me out on my bullshit. Undoubtedly, I was bullshitting. Undoubtedly. But that's what happens when you're alone in a room doing a monologue.
Right. Oh,
somebody has to call you out on your shit.
Right, exactly. They don't just fall asleep. That is hysterical. Darcy, I feel
can't believe in the glasses.
No, that's insane. Insane. But I loved chatting with you. I loved talking about therapy. I love talking about the stages of relationships. I do feel like people will not be sleeping during this episode. I can guarantee. Do you have a quote or piece of advice that you could leave our listeners with?
Examine your partner early on in the dating process. Ask yourself, can I accept this person as is? Because they're not a brownstone fixer-upper. They're not a project, and they're not changing. Men date people hoping they'll never change, which of course is as ridiculous as women tend to date people who have potential and are hoping that they're going to change. And that just makes your side of the aisle, you heteros, that sets you guys up for such a disaster. And it really sets all of us up for a big mistake. People, look, I sell change, but I know how hard it is. I know how hard it is to change. People can change. It is a slow, long process. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And nobody is changing because of their partner. They're only changing if they have an intrinsic need to.
Yeah.
So do you like your partner the way they are? Because that's who you've got.
I
You
love
don't
that.
have a next chapter or next version of your partner. That's
Right.
for the next partner that your partner has.
Mm, that's amazing and so true. Where
It's
can
so
everybody find you, follow you, and potentially sign up for the 30-day trial as well? If
Oh
you have
yeah.
room.
Yeah, I forgot about that. So I can be found at askdrdarcy.com, and that's DR, not doctor spelled out. And just there's a tab I think that says work with me. And I do a consultation first, which I don't charge for. Which I should probably charge for, but I don't, because I don't ever want money to be the barrier to somebody
No, of
getting in the
course.
door, but then it becomes the barrier to them staying in the door. So I
Mhm.
don't know. AskDrDarcy.com. That's where to find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.